The Golden State Warriors are a team with an impeccable track record over the last decade when it comes to team building and the moves they make to succeed at the highest level. They built their dynasty almost entirely through the draft, and their success allowed them to make huge moves like signing Kevin Durant, so after all of that success, they've earned the benefit of the doubt. We're used to seeing the moves that they make be good ones, and they themselves know that they don't typically mess up. But for the topic of today's video, we're going to be discussing a player they drafted 2 seasons ago in James Wiseman that may prove to be the biggest mistake they've made in a long time, and how they're doing everything in their power to cover this up. In this video, we're going to be going over the backstory of why the Warriors drafted James Wiseman, the expectations he entered the league with, the reality of his time in the NBA so far, and where he's been all season after he hasn't even played a game yet. Before we start though, I want to thank PrizePicks for sponsoring this video. PrizePicks is the perfect service for all of us basketball fans here because when you're involved, it makes watching games every night so much more fun and engaging. Basically, it's an application that provides you with lines on all kinds of individual player props, such as points, rebounds, assists, 3-pointers made, amongst others, and you simply have to choose whether you believe they will record over the set amount in the line or under the set amount in the line. Make your selections, wager however much you want to, and if your picks hit, you can win some big money. For some picks that I'm looking at making for today's slate of games, I'm thinking of going with Darius Garland to dish out over 8.5 assists, Tyrese Maxey to make over 1.5 threes, and D'Angelo Russell to make over 2.5 threes. If this sounds at all intriguing to you, then go use the link down in the description of the video to sign up today and use promo code REFERENCE to receive a 100% deposit match bonus up to $100. Once again, thank you to PrizePicks for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the topic at hand. The 2020 NBA Draft had a ton of hype surrounding it, as there were quite a few top prospects with tantalizing potential. Coming out of high school, James Wiseman was the one leading the pack, ranked as the #1 recruit in the country for the class of 2019. He ranked higher than guys like LaMelo Ball, Anthony Edwards, Tyrese Maxey, and many other rising stars that are currently in the NBA from that draft class, and when he committed to play for Memphis in college, he was projected to end up being the #1 pick in the draft. Once he got to Memphis though, things began to get pretty rocky. He missed the team's preseason games because he was still recovering from a minor injury, but he did get to play in the team's first 3 regular season games. The first 2 of which were admittedly against weaker opponents, as is the case for most top teams in college as they get warmed up for the rest of the season, and in those 2 games, Wiseman looked phenomenal, scoring a ton of points, grabbing a ton of rebounds, and blocking 8 combined shots in those 2 games. The third game, though, was against a ranked team in Oregon, which they lost to, and it also happened to be Wiseman's worst performance, where he scored just 14 points and blocked 1 shot. Looking back at it, this could honestly prove to be a pretty clear case of some foreshadowing for what comes later in his career, and you'll know what I mean when I get to it later in this video. After that third game, Wiseman officially got suspended by the NCAA for 12 games because Memphis coach Penny Hardaway helped pay for Wiseman's family to move to Memphis to be with him. It's completely ridiculous. It's yet another example of the NCAA being ridiculous as an organization with their rules that nobody likes, but it happened that way. Then, after he had served 7 of the games for his suspension, Wiseman just decided that he had enough of it all. He was not feeling happy at Memphis due to the circumstances, and he dropped out of the team altogether in order to prepare for the NBA draft by working out on his own time. Thus, we got to see him for a total of 3 games against collegiate competition and only 1 game against legitimately competitive competition overall. So in the draft of 2020, he was still one of the biggest mysteries as a player. James Wiseman as a prospect had a lot of things to love because he's a 7-footer with a monstrous 7'6" wingspan, he moves like a gazelle out in the open floor, and at least in small sample sizes, he used those dominant physical tools to overwhelm his opponents. Anthony Edwards was viewed by most as a lock to be the #1 pick in that draft, and the Warriors owned the 2nd selection. Their choice came down to picking either LaMelo Ball or James Wiseman, and ultimately they went with Wiseman, which now in hindsight they may be regretting. On paper, they needed a center more than they needed a guard, but if there's one thing I've learned over the years from following the draft, it's that you always take the better player over the better fit. LaMelo Ball had experience for years playing against professionals, he brought unbelievable playmaking and shot creation, and he honestly would have fit right into the Warriors team that loves to move the ball a ton and play unselfishly. Another side storyline that needs to be addressed with this situation is the fact that it's not exactly a secret that the Warriors tried their hardest to trade that number 2 pick, trying to attach it to different packages to acquire another star, to add to their core to continue to be able to contend. But no deal was reached, so they were forced to use it, and even after Wiseman was picked, that didn't stop the trade rumors from coming, especially when the Warriors missed the playoffs for a second season in a row. Now, during Wiseman's rookie season, he wasn't bad per se, as he averaged about 11.5 points and 6 rebounds per game, but there were definitely quite a few parts of his game that were worrisome. But unfortunately, he then tore his meniscus after 39 games played, so his season was cut short and he couldn't continue to develop. That was back in April of 2021. We're now in March of 2022. And after 11 months away from the court, he made his return not to the Warriors, but for their G League affiliate. The average recovery time for the injury that Wiseman suffered is about 3 to 6 months, so they've definitely been ultra cautious regarding his return, which I'm not at all saying is a bad thing, but there may be some ulterior motives behind why they're taking this approach outside of the obvious being his safety. Yes, when dealing with a player that they invested so much in, they need to ensure that he is physically ready to return from an injury like that, but we can't pretend that it also doesn't work pretty well in their favor to hold him out as long as possible. Remember earlier when I said they were trying to trade him and even the pick they used to get him? Well, that hasn't exactly stopped. Wiseman is, in theory, one of their most valuable assets right now because he did show some promising things as a rookie despite his ups and downs. The longer that he remains a mystery with upside, as opposed to an actual product with a large sample size to judge off of, the better, because the truth is I don't think Wiseman is quite as good as they hoped that he would be, and they don't want everyone else figuring that out so his trade value remains high. By playing him in the G League for a bit, he was inevitably going to dominate the competition because players that can handle someone with his size and mobility are all in the NBA, not the G League. And that's exactly what's happened, as he's put up some solid numbers in the G League through 2 games with Santa Clara, averaging about 17 points and 8 rebounds, while blocking 3 shots in 2 games as well. But even in these games, some of his weaknesses have shown through, which is worrying because, as I mentioned earlier, his physical tools have always allowed him to dominate against weaker competition, but the NBA is filled with top-notch big men that match up with him physically, and that has always been where he's struggled. Before the draft, some NBA scouts were comparing him to Hassan Whiteside, because like Whiteside, he has incredible physical tools for a big man, he can block a ton of shots, but he's not necessarily disciplined and commits a lot of bad fouls chasing those blocks, he makes some questionable decisions with the ball, he turns it over more than he needs to, and he honestly drops and fumbles a ton of passes thrown his way. Every time Warriors coach Steve Kerr gets asked about Wiseman and his return, he gives a new iteration of the same vague answer where the message is that there is no set-in-stone plan for Wiseman and that there are still a ton of things they need to figure out. But when you read between the lines, you know he doesn't plan on Wiseman being a big part of the rest of this season at least. His focus is on winning games with the Warriors in legitimate contention, and right now Wiseman is not developed enough to contribute positively to winning basketball. In many ways, James Wiseman reminds me of Marvin Bagley, which is definitely not something Warriors fans want to hear, but I'm just calling it how I see it. Bagley, like Wiseman, was drafted 2nd overall, 1 spot ahead of a future star. Bagley had decent production on the court despite some glaring weaknesses that lead you to question whether or not his production is hollow, and the Kings traded him away this year, just like how it would not surprise me at all if Wiseman gets traded away in this offseason. If James Wiseman is going to become a good starting center in the NBA, he's going to need to be in a situation where his development can be the focus, and the Warriors don't seem to be that team, and that is ultimately the reason why the Warriors are being so ultra cautious with him. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think about Wiseman and his career to this point. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.